Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, August 17th, 2020. Time for another show, a week of shows, as it happens. We do these things in blocks of 5, typically. I don't know if you've been following along for very long, but anyway, if you're new to the program, we can tell you it's Monday. We'll do this through Friday. Then we'll stop for the 2 days that we call the weekend. It's all kind of arbitrary, but what can you do? All right, well, that's we're adopting that convention from here going forward. Oh, conventions. Yes, I was sort of searching around for things that we might talk about today. As you know, there's zero news. Nothing is happening. The president is a very calm and collected individual, and I'm sure we'll be moving forward with a very widely accepted status quo. We love the way things are going. We want more of it, as the president told us over the weekend. We'll round up all the incredibly ridiculous things that happened. There's no respite over the weekend, except that I think a lot of us take time off from actually watching the stupid things happen as they happen, and we catch up with it all on Monday. That's the role we play here. Greg Dworkin, thankfully, will come by and help us round up the actual important events of the weekend, because you could easily get distracted, let's say, with several hundred not so important events, and some things that don't look that important but really do have a deep meaning behind them. It was the weekend of the post office story, I would say. That's probably the biggest thing going on over the weekend. We should take some time, perhaps we will, to discuss more in depth the idea that the post office story is blowing up and becoming a major concern for Americans across the country, but their lazy representatives in Congress, and in particular that the lazy and ineffective opposition party, the Democrats, aren't doing anything about it. They're not doing because they haven't, I guess, shot the Postmaster General, and so far, anyway. The weekend's over, so I think we can say that they didn't take care of that business over the weekend. That's true, and they're not likely to get around to that either. But the knock on them, at least early in the weekend, was, and even before the weekend, was that they weren't doing anything about it. They were taking a vacation, and why don't they ever fight back, sort of thing. And, you know, they're not perhaps the ideal champions for all things at all times. They move slowly, it's true. But I did want to point out that while we were complaining, well, for one thing, I guess the headline news, for instance, over at Daily Kos right now, is that Speaker Pelosi has called the House back for addressing the Postal Service and taking a vote on a bill set to address that and to take up other business, including investigating exactly what is going on at the post office. But the big complaint that they weren't doing anything was accompanied by, over the weekend, an enormous number of headlines from around the country, front page stuff on local papers all across the country, with a few exceptions, some major, actually, exceptions. But everyone became aware of this story over the weekend. And you might have noticed that when we said or complained, oh, those Democrats are all going home on vacation and doing nothing. Of course, we say vacation. They say district work period. And sometimes we laugh about that, and sometimes the work is more intense than other times. But this time, as it is the case many times, members go home to their districts with instructions, with packets of information, talking points, articles of relevance to whatever is hot that moment. And this time they were sent home with info on the post office, of not only just info, but instructions about what to be doing while they were at home. So what happened was a nationwide network of powerful elected Democrats met together, then fanned out across the country back in their respective states to use the political power that they have amassed, some of them over decades, as part of their own personal sphere of influence and campaigning to build it, and then calling upon the local media to take notice of this story that was of some importance to them. And they were able to stress the importance and the alarm that they felt at what was happening. And all of a sudden, Saturday and Sunday, wow, we got the volume turned up high on this one. Hold on just a second while we fix this one. Hang on just a second, Greg. I got some volume issues to resolve here. Okay, I think I can fix that pretty well. All right, I think we should be okay now. I was just saying, though, that, once...
I was listening. Keep going.
Okay. Once the headlines broke over the weekend and everybody began to see them, and that, of course, built even more momentum for the story. Some people discovered it for the first time, but they certainly discovered that their local press, television, print media, what have you, were following the story. It gathered momentum without any notice really taken of the fact that, 200 federal level elected Democrats had made it their mission to make this the number one story for the weekend and had dispatched themselves to almost all 50 states to try and drive this story. And once everybody realized what an outrage it was, well, that half that doesn't pay close attention, and who could blame them? You don't need to in order to function day to day. Pay close attention to what members of Congress were doing, especially if they're not represented in Congress in the House of Representatives by a Democrat locally. It's hard to know. There was a lot of work, a lot of staff work, a lot of members working on this to get this to be a big story everywhere all at once. But on the other hand, these guys do wear, let's say, asbestos suits very often. They can take that heat. They don't mind the fact that, okay, some percentage of the population, maybe most of us, will say, why those lazy bums, they're not doing anything, when we only have discovered the story because of those things that those lazy bums have been doing. So, okay, we appreciate it. We wanted you to know about it. It's not the solution by itself, but it's a step towards it. The hearing at which Postmaster General Louis DeJoy was scheduled to testify, originally scheduled, I think, for September 17th or so, bumped up and moved into late August. And then, of course, that led to complaints of, well, why not today? Why not tomorrow? Why not arrest him right now? We'll discuss all of that and what needs to be done in terms of process and procedure. But some very interesting developments. The fact that the House is coming back, I don't see what you do. How do you knock that, right? You ask them to come back, they're coming back. Well, I want them to arrest Louis DeJoy tomorrow. I do too. They do too. But they do want to come back and lay the groundwork for that. And that includes having a hearing, finding out what the hell this guy says about what he's doing, then disputing his story and saying we need to dig further, as opposed to just simply, throwing tomatoes at him or just going right to shooting the guy. Bad news, generally speaking, when you take that route. But yeah, you've got to, people pointed out, well, sure, they moved the hearing up, but I read the letter and it says we request that you testify. Why isn't this
the thing.
An arrest warrant?
You step back, and there are some people calling for that. You step back and look at the big picture as you laid out, and you have to appreciate the fact that the Democrats have put this issue on every local news.
Yep.
My local news is covering it like nobody's business. And in fact, I saw this morning that the Attorney General, Bill Tong from Connecticut, was on Morning Joe talking about the fact that he's one of the people, including New Jersey, who's thinking of suing the federal government over this because it's interfering with state elections.
Yeah.
So a lot of the pushback is going to be from states. We talked about this a little bit at the end of last week, that rural states like Montana, for example, where Jim Tester was very vocal, or West Virginia, where Joe Manchin was incredibly vocal, or even Tennessee, where a fellow named Jim Cooper, who you never heard of, is one of the most conservative Democrats in the House, tweeted this. I was just amazed that it was him. It looked like Maxine Waters, who did her own work at the post office. Everybody's going to their own post offices and then getting on TV at night.
That's the thing. There were post offices everywhere.
Right? But Jim Cooper says, I called Speaker Pelosi today, this was on August 15th, and asked her to call the House back into session immediately to deal with the crisis at the post office. This is not a bomb thrower. This is like reading it from Joe Manchin.
Yeah.
He's probably to the right of Joe Manchin. Trump is attempting to sabotage the U.S. Postal Service. And then he goes on to say, we need to subpoena the Postmaster General, and if he fails to appear, we should send the sergeant at arms to arrest him.
They can't do that.
What? Jim Cooper is saying
Yeah,
this?
really. That is pretty
And
interesting.
then he goes on and says, it's not just ballots that are being slowed, it's life-saving medication and checks for our veterans and our elderly. Tampering with the mail is a federal crime, and DeJoy on Trump's orders is tampering.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that's basically the talking points right there, but it's just coming from such an unexpected source. It's like, okay, this is going to snowball.
Yes.
And in fact, that's what happened. That was
Noted
on the
liberal.
15th. And then,
Today's the
Pelosi
17th.
says, okay, we are going to bring the House back, which we don't normally do, and it's a big deal. And not only that, we're going to do it and have this, I think Carolyn Maloney's subcommittee is doing it. We're going to have this hearing on Monday, a week from today, and we'll do it right in the middle of the Republican National Convention, which is pretty unusual. Now, Trump's been known to interfere with making news during the Democratic National Convention. The norms, long since gone, everything stopped in 2016, was that you stayed out of the news while your opponents did their thing, and then they showed you the same courtesy during your week, but that's gone.
Yep.
And so because and by the way, we should probably be noting that we are broadcasting live from the Democratic National Convention.
Oh, yes,
because
right.
why not? The whole thing is taking place in your living room. It's not like a real room.
Yeah, this could be at the convention. It's just really quiet.
Yeah, exactly.
See if I can find some crowd noise
So the
to
fact
add to
that
this thing.
the Democrats are doing this and structuring it in such a way as to get maximum publicity is fine, because the action's taking place at state level, and the national level is somewhat limited in terms of what you can do. If DeJoy refuses to appear, you can subpoena him, you can send a sergeant, you can do all those things, but it's going to be delay, and then you're going to make it even more partisan. Whereas if you simply hold the hearings in order to gain publicity, then you do what Jim Cooper did, and just point out it's not about politics, it's about life-saving medication for our elderly veterans. Go ahead and fight with me over that.
Oh yeah, they will. But yeah, inviting that fight is important.
I implore you, fight
obviously.
with me over that.
It's a fight they would likely lose. I keep thinking of all the times that Trump has bragged falsely about being the one to sign the Veterans Choice Bill, which he
That
didn't.
Obama signed.
Right. But yeah, spending all, the way he expresses it. Our beautiful, beautiful veterans, so strongly supported by us.
With their beautiful, beautiful diabetes and their beautiful, beautiful need for insulin.
Yes, right. And so all of that, we were, of course, assured by him and have been, I think Daniel Dale says 100+ times, that he and he alone is responsible for the quality of care that our veterans now get. No other president, they've all tried to have an impact on veterans' health care, but they have failed. But I have. Veterans, the health care you're getting, including the medicine that you're getting too late to help you, is me, and only me. And now,
well,
of course,
another person with a big
someone
following
else.
is
Democrat
Taylor
did it.
Swift. So she tweets, Trump's calculated dismantling of U.S. Postal Service proves one thing clearly. He's well aware that we do not want him as our president. He's chosen to blatantly cheat and pull millions of Americans' lives at risk in an effort to hold on to power, says Taylor Swift. Donald Trump's ineffective leadership bravely worsened the crisis we're in, and he's now taking advantage of it to subvert and destroy our right to vote and vote safely, request a ballot early, vote early. Step back and look at the big picture. What happened is this went from, we were talking about it on the Democratic side, the activists, to suddenly a lot of people are talking about it, to everyone's talking about it. Conservatives are really upset about all of this, and now they're starting to push the idea that, hey, this is all a Democratic scheme using the post office to try to prevent Trump from being reelected, because everybody knows there's no real crisis here. They have plenty of money. They handle billions of pieces of mail during Christmas, and they ought to be able to do this easily. And so, of course, these were all just natural steps that you need to take, because the post office was going bankrupt, and you got to run life like a business. And so we're fighting you on this. And, okay, you're going to fight the veterans who are in need of insulin, and go ahead, have that fight. It's not an effective comeback. A lot of it, of course, isn't true. Some of it is. Certainly every single mailbox that's been removed isn't because Trump is trying to steal the election.
Some of them had
Some
a
of them
light
were
that
closed
was out
before
on
this
one
even
side.
started, and some of it is because the volume in that area is down and so on and so forth. That's not the point. The point is that nobody can trust Trump about anything he says or anything he does.
That is true. That's a problem.
I was laughing over the weekend about the idea that, some of these people, like the head of DHS, may not actually be the head of DHS.
Oh, yeah. Who said that? That's
Who said that? So maybe they didn't go through the proper procedure, and maybe they don't really have the right to do any of these things. The point being that not only is David right about so much, but that you can't trust them about anything. And so if you can't trust them about anything, why should you believe them that it has nothing to do with stealing the election? Why would you give them the benefit of the doubt when Trump goes on TV and says that's what it's about?
That's true. That's a problem for him, having admitted to it. I mean, I would have said don't admit that, but he never listens to me.
I would have said don't do that. But if you're going to do that, don't admit to it.
Oh, yeah.
And if you are going to admit to it, tell him it's a Democrat's fault. Well, he said that. Well, the Democrats didn't want to give us any money. Well, we have the HEROES Act sitting there, and so that's not true.
Yeah.
Because the House passed stuff 3 months ago that you are not acting on. So Mark Meadows is on TV not defending the Postmaster General per se, not defending this scheme per se, but claiming it's all really about the fact that you can't trust the mail, and just because you don't have any proof that there's such a thing as mail fraud, you don't have any proof that there isn't, he said to Jake Tapper in an incredibly clever comeback that everybody looked at him and said, what are you talking about?
Yeah. Just for the record, I should point out that a lack of evidence actually is, evidence that something doesn't exist. So, I mean, whatever. But yeah, it's even funnier, of course. Well, you can't prove it doesn't, and that led to lots of people pointing out that the same applies to the moon being made of green cheese, Bigfoot,
and everything else, right? And how about Q conspiracies?
Right, true. Can't prove that
you can't prove they're there. Therefore, that proves that they're there because that's how well they hide it.
I can't even prove.
See, I run rings about you logically.
Perfect. Yeah, that was pretty incredible, and I didn't see the interview. I saw people circulating the clip. Did anybody see it? What did Jake Tapper say to that?
They always cut it off right at that point.
Yeah, I'm wondering. My interest is in what does he say after that's done? Because that's crazy.
But that's clearly not true. He should say to him, but that's clearly bullshit. He should say to him. On occasion they have, but I don't know what they did in this case. Let me read you a couple. This is from the Pundit Roundup.
All right.
But I did a little bit on the post office. My theme for the Pundit Roundup today was messing with the post office is messing with life.
Okay.
Right? Sheridan Hay from The Secret of Lost Things. There's so much love sent through the mail. I mean, that's what you're fighting, people. Right? A swath of rural Americans, says Nicholas Grossman, say their lives are tough and complain they've been forgotten and vote for people who work to make their lives harder. Trade wars, fight to cut health care support, now subsidized mail. Nobody has to prioritize these issues, but that's what you voted for. On the other hand, people have to understand that, and I've seen some ridiculous, wacky suggestions. Why doesn't just FedEx take care of the votes?
Yes. I've seen it suggested.
Okay, well, here's the problem. The post office is like 1,000 times bigger. They handle just so much more volume.
True. That's one problem.
FedEx and UPS cannot make up that volume. Further,
you can't
FedEx and UPS, unlike the post office, don't deliver and pick up to every address in America.
True. Also.
Only the U.S. Postal Service does that.
We should. I was going to say we should start a service that does, but we have.
They just don't deliver. The U.S. Postal Service does. It's that simple. That's why it's a postal service. It's not a business.
True.
You can't expect it to make money. The military doesn't make money, but you don't talk about canceling them. Not if you're Republican.
True.
Right? So you have that. And by the way, all the state laws, most of them, as far as I know, have something about, you need a postmarked ballot for it to be valid and stuff like that. U.S. Postal Service does do postmarks, but FedEx and UPS do not. So if you send it by them, where's your postmark? How do you know it?
Yep.
You know, it came when it came.
A lot of states do require not
it
all.
seems like a small thing, but those are the rules.
Right.
So
it was never a problem for that to be a rule because, anyone can get a postmark.
Right.
Because the service works.
And by the way, you still have the
wouldn't.
right to walk into your local post office if it's still open and ask them to hand cancel it right there so that you have your cancellation. Then you can walk it over to your town clerk. I mean, in New England towns, which are smaller, we have the advantage of being able to do stuff like that.
Yeah, and you can walk.
It's but, it just does not make sense to substitute anything for the Postal Service. If you have a problem, and this was a story that was published back in April in TechCrunch. It's called, "If we let the U.S. Postal Service die, we'll be killing small businesses with it. The impacts would have major negative repercussions for e-commerce." So the issues about the post office were there. A lot of them were caused by the government. The Postal Service does take in money, but requiring them to cover their pensions for the next 75 years sort of took, some money out of their coffers there. But the point is, if you see that you have a problem, what you do is you fix it. You don't just say, there's a problem, let's make it worse, which is what Postmaster General
you and I
is doing.
don't say that. Right. I mean, Republicans say it, sometimes on television, but...
So you do need the Postal Services, John Ward, to receive your mail-in or absentee ballot, but you do not need the Postal Service to deliver the vote. Good. You can return to local elections office at any time, or an in-person early voting location, or a drop box, depending upon what your state allows. Not every state has them, but every state has local elections offices, and all but 5 have early voting.
Yeah.
And if you want to get your ballot well ahead of the election, vote it at your leisure, and return it in person without waiting in line, pick one of those options. You can do that. There's no reason to doubt the vote on the Democratic side. There's only reason to doubt the vote on the Republican side. Margaret Sullivan writes, and again, just to give you an idea of how this is dominating everything, Trump's attacks on the Postal Service deserve sustained red alert coverage in the media. Listen to President Trump long enough, and despite his penchant for falsehood, you'll eventually hear some unvarnished truth. That happened Thursday when he stated his intentions clearly in an interview with Fox Business News. He doesn't want to approve billions in emergency funding for the cash-strapped and struggling U.S. Postal Service for a simple reason: Democrats want to expand mail-in voting.
Okay.
His words were stark. They need the money in order to have the post office work so it can take all those millions and millions of ballots. That's a quote. And he added that holding back funding means they can't have universal mail-in voting. They just can't have it. In other words, he doesn't want American citizens fearful of exposure to the coronavirus, with increasing levels of virus seen in children and especially schools. That's another story. To have every opportunity to vote in November.
Yep. Well, yeah. He admits it. We're watching it happen. Everyone's in action. All the levers are being pulled and the pieces are in motion.
We're going to cover the polling after the break.
Okay.
But you have to step back and look at the bigger picture here.
Again. All right.
As you always do.
Another step back.
We have a pandemic going on.
True.
And Trump is handling it miserably. Okay.
Yes.
We have the U.S. Postal Service debacle.
Yeah.
And Trump is handling it miserably. That doesn't help him. We have schools opening with people getting coronavirus basically the day of and sometimes the week of reopening schools. That's going badly. We're not going to have sports in the fall. That's the back. And of course, there's still a unemployment insurance that hasn't been dealt with. And we have some financial cliffs that are facing us before the November election. All of that is going to hurt Trump. It's all sitting there. It's not going away. And there's only 78 days between now and the election. So whatever the polling is telling us, there are reasons why the polling is telling us what it's telling us. And this whole idea that the polls are going to inevitably tighten is bullshit.
Well, I know. You keep thinking
we don't know that. It might.
All know it.
But then again, there's years that it hasn't. And the reasons that I just laid out are reasons why it might not. And we just don't know. And so I had to admit this morning on Twitter, I'm a pretty bad pundit because I don't know what's going to happen. And I'm not going to tell you what's going to happen. I will tell you it's unreasonable to assume any of this stuff. Don't assume they're going to tighten. Don't assume the lead's going to grow. So far, the numbers have been rock stable. If you're going to assume anything, assume that.
I guess so. There's really no reason not to assume more of the same. I mean, none of the players have changed.
That's your best bet. but that's not a guarantee. We don't know.
Yeah. All right. How about, what do you think the effect on the polls will be? Maybe Trump can break through by recommending a new second poison that everybody ingest in order to battle the coronavirus.
Yeah, that's pretty outrageous. And it turns out that one of the companies that's involved with this new fake breakthrough is owned by the MyPillow guy.
Why doesn't he just put it in the pillows?
I don't know. But Trump is touting it because one of his supporters makes money off of it. This should not surprise anybody. By the way, I was laughing because speaking of MyPillow, there was a story in the Washington Post about the House Republicans realizing that they're going to lose and they have no chance of getting back the majority. They're talking about after the election what to do about Kevin McCarthy. And there were some relatively uncomplimentary things in this particular article, which I think was in the Washington Post. But one of them was, this guy's useless. We call him My Kevin.
Like My Pillow?
Because all he is, is a trunk stick of pink, and he's absolutely useless for everything.
Yeah. Well, all right, fine. I guess that.
So what do you think My Kevin's going to say about this?
Put My Pillow over My Kevin's face and be rid of him. I was wondering, by the way, there's a joke in there somewhere about Klan hoods and My Pillowcase. I think they should work that up. We'll workshop that over the break. All right. Well, yeah, so watch out for I think now we're up, maybe this is the third poison that he's recommended. There's hydroxychloroquine, bleach, and other cleaning chemicals. And
this one's probably harmless, but that's not the point.
Okay, well, I guess so. I mean, people were pointing out, I guess it's an extract of the oleander plant, which is pretty toxic, apparently. I don't know, but it's supposed to just go around eating the plants, generally speaking, anyway.
Well, but it's all natural, like strychnine and belladonna.
Right. Well, right. We like to keep it organic. I mean, it should be healthy
what
when
could go
you're
wrong?
dead. Right. Okay. So watch out for the poisons that the Republicans are going to tell you to take. Don't do it. And we'll be back after 2 minutes to tell you, I don't know, if not what to take, what to avoid anyway. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Plenty more to round up. We only got to a fraction of the things. We only got a fraction of the things we're going to ignore. There's so many things out there. But what we're not ignoring next, we'll go back to Greg. What are we going to not ignore next, Greg?
We're going to not ignore polling.
This is tough to say. Okay.
It's just there's a lot of good polling out, so it came over the weekend, and I think it's well worth doing. After all, people have to do their baselines prior to the convention to measure whether or not there's a convention bounce. And some of them also wanted to get a sense of whether Kamala Harris's addition made any difference, which it both did and didn't. But the bottom line is that things aren't changing all that much. Nate Cohn probably had the best summary of all of this.
Oh, really?
Because a CNN poll came out that said that Biden was up by 4. And that was freaking people out because people just love to be freaked out.
4. It's not enough.
Everybody who had almost gotten over it then said, oh, my God, 2016. But no, not really.
Okay.
So here's the deal. Nate Cohn says, taking the education-weighted generally live interview probability samples together.
What?
The live interview polls, the ones where they call people.
All right. That's a lot of words.
It seems pretty, because they're considered to be the quality gold standard polls, it seems pretty clear that Biden's lead has shrunk by a couple of points over the last month. But then he also maintains a pretty comfortable lead, which is actually above 50.
All right.
So, for example, the CNN poll that people are freaking out about, in June and July, he had numbers like 14. Although I have to point out, there were 3 polls prior to this one. 2 were in double digits, and the one between them had 5. So he went double digit, 5, double digit, now he's 4. But, averaging them or giving the June, July polls together, CNN had a 14, now it's 4. That's a change in 10 points. Very volatile. NBC Wall Street Journal was 10, now it's 9. That's 1 point. Pew was 10, now it's 8. That's 2 points. Monmouth was 12, now it's 10. 2 points. Fox was 10, now 7. That's 3 points. And ABC Washington Post, which came out this morning, was 15. Now it's 12. It's probably the best of all the commercial media pollsters, Gary Langer. And so that's a -3. Average them all together, you get a -3.5. You go from 11.8 to 8.3, which is about the average today in the 538 aggregate. 8.3, as Harry Hinton points out before the latest slew of polls came out, is where we were at, and that is an incredible advantage for somebody running against an incumbent that's basically never happened before.
Okay.
So the bottom line is, figure in the Washington Post, CNN, all of the polls together, those live polls, 8.3 is a remarkable lead. It's been pretty steady, and if you want to say, okay, it's tightened by a couple of 3 points.
All right. So
from a big lead to a big lead.
Point to that.
So no reason to freak out about that. Even more interesting, Nate Cohen says, one interesting thing is that Biden's lead has held firm in the online polls. We have 3 different methods of doing polls. Okay?
That's right.
You're part of a polling panel like YouGov.
I'm not.
Okay, and you do your online polls that way, or civics. That's one way to do it.
Go back to the same people.
You can have what they call an IVR poll, which we call robopolls, like PPP.
All right. Yes. Right.
Right. You get a call, but it's not from a live person.
Press 1 for Biden or whatever.
Press 2 for I don't want Trump. That kind of thing.
Right.
And then you have the live calling polls. So you have 3 distinct methods of polling people. And Nate Cohn points out one interesting thing is that Biden's lead is held firm in the online polls, the YouGovs, and the result is a decent convergence between the live and online polls heading in the convention. So if you look at live blue, red online, green is the robopolls. The robopolls are steady. The online polls are steady. And the live caller polls are a little bit more volatile, but when you add them all together, you get steady.
Okay.
And so the averages, the aggregates, because all of them include some of these non-live caller polls, have all been incredibly steady for Biden. 2020 is way less volatile than 2016 was. There have been some other years where it's been this steady, but not recently. And certainly not 2016, which was all over the place. There was actually a point where Trump led. Nobody remembers that, but it happened. And so, the stability of the polls is just one of those remarkable things that's worth talking about. So other observations Nate makes, as a consequence, I think we have a particularly clear understanding of the state of play right now, despite the CNN poll, which really isn't that much of an outlier because it's only 4.5 points off the average. And another important point is that the decline in Biden's lead, that small decline, has not been accompanied by a decline in his support. His support keeps going up, and it's over 50. It's actually up to 51.
Okay.
Okay.
Why a decline
it's
at all?
just that Trump, if Biden's gained 3 points, Trump's gained 5.
Okay.
But that only brings
from
Trump
where?
up to
Why?
42.
Okay. That's true. That's a point.
Right? So the average we're talking about here is 51-42, which is winning territory for Biden.
Yeah. You can win
Terrible
with
numbers
that.
for an incumbent. And interestingly, the only thing that's happened is that with all the flurry of polling and so-called tightening, all it's done is bring Trump's numbers up to about what his job approval is, which isn't very good.
Yeah. Although, I guess were most people just expecting that there would be no, I would think people would be expecting a bump
I
in the
don't know
polls
what people were expecting.
for Biden.
It's really hard
like
to
the news
know.
of the VP
We have people who are
selection.
unhappy because they're always unhappy. We're people
Sure.
unhappy because it's not a 27-point lead.
I would
We
like
have people who are unhappy because 2016 freaked them out, and they'll never get that sanguine look at life again, ever. And that's totally understandable, by the way.
Yeah.
We have people freaking out because they think Trump's going to steal the election, and that's only because he said he was going to.
That is also understandable.
And it's all understandable.
Okay.
But what are people expecting? I don't know what
am I
people are
saying it for,
expecting. Biden is running over 50%. Clinton never came close to that. Trump is only getting 42, and that's with a slurry of so-called good polls that only show him losing by less than the other polls. And the only thing that's happened is that whereas he was always running behind his job approval numbers, he's now starting to match his job approval numbers. But those job approval numbers aren't any good. And by the way, that leads just about nobody undecided anymore, which makes sense because we got 78 days before the election.
Yeah.
So Nate Cohen also says, as an aside, this way of looking at the polls does kind of complicate the so-called shy Trump theory. The most straightforward interpretation of a shy Trump theory would be consensus on the Biden percentage, but Trump is lower in live callers because people are afraid to tell the live callers that they support Trump.
I can't believe that anymore. Okay.
But that's not what we see. It's the opposite of what we see.
No wonder. All right.
And because there's really no support whatsoever that there are shy Trump theories, or shy Trump voters, I should say, which makes sense if you've ever met a Trump voter because they're anything but shy.
Rarely the case. True.
We have a neighborhood where I live
Yeah.
where it's going to go overwhelmingly for Biden. And the only signs out are Trump signs.
Well, are there Biden
Right?
signs?
The other
yet?
signs that are out aren't
I guess there's that.
Biden signs. They're Black Lives Matter signs.
Yeah, okay. Well, that does mean something. But if you're
does,
counting
but I'm just
Biden
saying,
signs, it won't help
Trump
anyone.
voters aren't shy.
True. No, and they love signs and flags and boats, I guess.
We have these
apparently.
big flags flapping from their houses, and so it's pretty clear to know where they're at. Everybody in the neighborhood knows who they are. Some of them are good people, but they're not shy.
Rarely. Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, that's
Anyway, they're not shy telling pollsters, which
That's
is really
probably-
what that's about.
it is
The whole
doubtful
thing's
at
kind of
this
silly.
point.
The fact of the matter
the
is Biden's
incumbent.
doing quite well in the polls. It's been a pretty steady lead.
Yeah.
The points fluctuate a couple. We now have the conventions. The conventions are going to be virtual. Are the conventions going to lead to any bumps? We don't know. There's another thing that people shouldn't just automatically guarantee you. Jason Miller, one of Trump's campaign aides, was saying, Biden's going to get a 10-point bump.
all right. I mean,
He is the only advisor who also said Biden's a great debater and Trump probably is going to get his ass kicked. Or words to that effect.
all right.
And that's what you're supposed to do on that side. That's
Expectations
traditional
game, right?
politicking. You're supposed to build up your opponent so if he doesn't meet expectations, you could say you won.
I guess, yeah. I mean, usually
That's what you're supposed to
works.
do. Nobody else on the Trump side is doing that. They're trying to make Biden out to be this old doddering guy who couldn't possibly debate. So all he has to do is show up to beat expectations, which is ridiculous. So Jason Miller's trying to set the expectations for the debate bump. Most people are expecting, if there's expecting anything, a couple of points because it's never been done this way before. But the interesting thing is that Trump is a known quantity. He's going to have a convention next week. Why should his numbers go up? He's on TV every week anyway with the My Pillow guy selling
true.
Oleander.
Yeah. There won't be any sense of excitement that comes from that. That's for
I
sure.
also saw that he's going to try to be on TV every day, not just the last day.
Really? Okay. So they'll all appreciate that. All the Republicans, I guess nobody's traveling to the convention, so no money.
So what
lost
kind
in
of
that
bumps
sense.
should we expect from that? I don't know. And then, you've never been a tremendous fan of these conventions. I haven't either.
No.
They're okay, but conventions generally don't change all that many minds, and debates don't change all that many minds.
It's okay. I mean, I don't.
Is this year different? I don't know. We'll see.
It's a Yeah, I guess so. I'll be interested to
That
see
many
what kind
undecideds. Who's going
of
to change their
numbers
mind?
they are able to get. I guess they can get exact numbers of how many people are watching or something like that. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I don't know. It's going to be harder for me to convince myself to tune in just to sort of participate in the cultural ritual this way. I mean, but I guess are the networks carrying the whatever it is, the streaming
I
video?
think they're
What's
committed to a
happening?
couple hours each night.
Yeah, I guess so. All right. Well, maybe I'll turn them on. I like to see it that way, the way most people see it, as opposed to following it gavel to gavel is just too much for me. And and that's an amazing thing. I mean, I like gavels, but
Yeah.
it's what happens in between that bothers me. Okay. Well, it'll
So
be real interesting
here's
to
a
see how
terrible
this
thing
works.
that just came by my way. There's a couple of terrible things that are going out there. I don't want to lose sight of the fact that there was the Red Show in Cedar Rapids, Iowa,
Yes.
and they got hit the way we got hit here in Connecticut.
Yep. Yep.
Difference being that the retros are straight wind storms. They don't
Yes.
rotate like hurricanes or tornadoes, but they do just as much damage. And Cedar Rapids is really hard hit. There's not as much media coverage. The governor just declared a national emergency, and people are still without power and hurting. Another thing is Lauren Weber from looks like from Huffington Post passed this on Twitter. Over 5 months into the U.S. COVID-19 response, in our latest KH News AP underfunded, under threat investigation finds that some local health departments have received almost no federal funds yet. 5 months into this.
What? Oh, well, send that. Let's take a look.
So let me retweet that.
Send funds.
And that's horrible. I mean, we already have
Yes.
trouble trying to figure out how we're going to do all the things we're going to do, and we have the issue of
Let's see this.
how the schools are going to cope, and our
Right.
public health departments, who we need for guidance, are not getting funded.
Yes. Now, let's see. So they were probably depending on federal funding to take care of these things. They must have been. They might be operating now on perhaps state funding or just.
$19 trillion has
Building
been set
debt.
aside to help businesses, the airlines, and hospitals.
Yeah.
And some of the local health departments charged with preventing further spread of the disease have to claw for that cash, writes Lauren Weber,
Yes, and they're
who
competing.
is KH News and former Huffington Post reporter. That's why she's Lauren Weber, HP.
Not Hewlett-Packard.
So little money has flowed to some local health departments for many reasons. Bureaucracy has bogged things down. Politics have pecked into the process. And understaffed departments have struggled to take time away from critical needs to actually navigate the red tape required for the money. It doesn't make sense to me how anyone thinks this is a way to do business, said E. Oscar Aline of NACHO, that's the National Association of County Health Officials. We're never going to get ahead of the pandemic response if we're still handicapped. And by mid-July in Missouri, at least 50 health departments had yet to see any federal dollars, but some bigger cities' health departments received a massive influx of cash. Louisville was given $42 million by April, more than doubling its annual budget. And Louisville received more money from the CARES Act than the entire government of the city of Minneapolis.
Okay.
For example,
Seems wrong.
I don't understand the extra layers of onus for the bureaucracy, especially if hundreds of millions of dollars are going to the hospitals and we have to be responsible to apply for 50 grants. And as we speak, the U.S. has passed 5.4 million cases and 170,000 deaths. And again, the background for all of this Trump-Biden stuff is what's going on with the pandemic. It's dominating even more so than the post office. And, those two stories plus school sports and school attendance are just all going to swirl together, and they're going to make a pretty toxic mix that I don't think Oleander alone is going to treat. That's just my opinion.
Very likely true. Going to remain a problem. So, I wonder where they're making up or if they're making up the funding shortfall from. I point this out only to remind everybody that just last week, though it seems like 100 years ago, the Trump administration proposal for hiding unemployment insurance extension under some different name was dependent on these same states which were expecting millions of dollars of federal aid to deal with the coronavirus pandemic not getting it, but they're supposed to scrape together the $100 match to bring the total up to 400, and nobody gets to 300 unless they come up with that 100, and nobody's going to be able to find it. They're trying to pay for opening their schools and making up for the lack of federal aid in all this stuff. 5 months. That's quite a while, quite a time to wait. I don't think that money's coming.
Right. Exactly. So that's basically what's going on.
You got it in Mitch McConnell's
here's an interesting one.
State. Yeah.
Which I think is worthy of debate, and maybe you have some insight too.
No,
it's by Ezra Klein, and it's in Vox, so it's a Vox-plainer. And it poses a very simple question.
All right.
Why Republicans are failing to govern?
Yes, that's a question.
And, he goes down to all the things that they haven't done.
Why
And then says, what's baffling is that Republicans are running this strategy while they're in the majority. Donald Trump is president of the United States and Mitch McConnell is Senate majority leader. They carry the burden of governance and they'll bear the blame for failure. If polls are to be believed, both of them are likely to lose these jobs. What, after all, is the case for re-electing a Republican Party that has no coherent policy response to a virus that Europe and Asia have managed to control or to an economy in free fall? GOP 2020, more of this, is not a winning slogan when 70% of the country says we're on the wrong track. In fact, politically, the Republican Party's current approach is so suicidal, I figured I must be missing something, says Ezra Klein. Someone must have a plan, a theory, an alternative. Chaos is Trump's brand, but surely McConnell won't walk passively back into the minority. And so I began asking Republican Hill staffers and policy experts for correction. What's going on? What is this? I posed these questions to Tea Party conservatives, populist reformers, and old-line Reaganites, and the answer in every case was the same. Different Republican senators have different ideas, but across the party as a whole, there is no plan. The Republican Party has no policy theory. They don't know how to drive the economy back to full unemployment, and there's no plan to come up with a plan. Anybody with both the interest and authority to do so. The Republican Party is broken as a policy-making institution, and it has been for some time. I don't think you're missing anything, said a top Republican Senate staffer. You have a whole bunch of people in the Senate posturing for 2024.
I guess that's it.
Oh, well then, Ezra says.
Oh.
So, he's got some theories.
Right.
Number one, it's Trump's fault. Number two, conservative thinking has no room for viruses. Number three, they're worried about Tea Party 2.0. And number four, they've just given up on 2020. So what do you think?
I guess it seems like all of that combined. The Tea Party 2.0 is here. I don't know what they're wondering about or waiting for. It's called QAnon.
Well, they're afraid to do anything because they'll be primary. Is the point there.
I guess that's maybe the plan is to do like they did with the Tea Party. Hold on for dear life. Don't acknowledge them. If you manage to survive your primary, join the Tea Party caucus afterwards and say you were Tea Party all along. That's what they did last time, and I guess now that'll be QAnon, which will be scary.
Yeah, because there are now QAnon people actually in there.
Yes, or about to be.
In Congress, that is to say.
And there will be just people who convert to it later on. I mean, recall, as we discussed on this show, the vast majority of what became the Tea Party caucus, called itself the Tea Party caucus inside Congress, were members who did not run on the Tea Party platform and had nothing to do with Tea Party activism at all. They just found out that people were into this thing called the Tea Party, and Michelle Bachmann said, let's start a Tea Party caucus and declare ourselves Tea Party people. So they did. It was ineffective.
And
fell
where's
apart
Michelle
very
Bachmann?
Quickly. She's gone. It's been supplanted by the Freedom Caucus. So I guess the real question is whether they do the same with QAnon and whether they even attempt to organize QAnon into something that they think will supplant the Freedom Caucus or not. And amazingly, the Freedom Caucus is the more durable of the two institutions, and it's been around for 10 minutes.
I have to admit, it's been a long time since I even thought about 1L Michelle.
I know. Isn't it great? It's been fantastic.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
She's,
Steve King? Who's that?
They're
so we're
not
going to
crazy
have this
enough.
QAnon nutcase and maybe a couple others to take their place, but, I don't miss that.
It's literally being out crazied. I mean, you never thought that would happen to Michelle Bachmann, but she's a bore compared to, they're all Satanist child molesters and cannibals. Wow.
Right.
They got it all over Michelle Bachmann on that one. She just thought, what was it? What was her thing? Oh, yeah, the bathrooms are full of lesbians, I think.
Something like that. But here's, the concrete aspect of this. This is Cook Political Report, and Jessica Taylor, who's their Senate editor. Yeah. New Senate ratings changed this morning at Cook Political. South Carolina moves from likely to lean Republican.
Really? They're not
Jamie
very
Harrison
lean,
is making some inroads there.
Okay. Excellent.
Lean Republican is a winnable race.
Yes, if you can find any lean
Likely
Republicans.
is not, but lean, yeah, you can win a lean race in a tsunami year.
True. It happens. That's what's so exciting about these.
Right. So Jonathan
elections.
Bernstein, political scientist, says, "Wow, that's going to be a lot of money that's going to go into South Carolina." I don't know if I'm still skeptical, but still, wow.
Yeah. Right.
It's like Texas,
hard to believe. That,
you look at Texas and you go, wow.
Lindsey Graham.
I don't know that means that we win Texas, but hey, the numbers are the numbers.
When they say a lot of money will go into it, they also mean Republican money, which is not frequently
That's
done.
right. You have to defend, so it'll take money away from elsewhere.
Right. So, excellent. I love
money is fungible
but
limited.
True. All right. Well, that is exciting. We'll have to keep a watch on all of that.
So, but it goes back to what the heck is Mitch McConnell even thinking? What is he doing? Why does he want to be in the minority?
Want to? No. But might happen.
Well, why aren't you doing something about it so that you're not?
I don't know what he can... Yeah, I don't know what he would do.
What he can do, he could pass a bill that would help Americans.
Oh, well, but that's anti-Republican.
He can protect the post office, which was always a Republican thing to do because of the rural aspects.
There is a theory out there that is what they will end up doing, and that they'll spend their convention lying and saying, yes, we need to protect the post office. The Democrats are out to destroy it.
I have a feeling that the Democrats are going to spend their convention first.
Yeah.
Talking a little bit about the post office. And the funny thing about, and it is pretty funny, is that everybody was upset, and some Democrats still are, that John Kasich is speaking.
Yes.
But of course, his father was a mailman.
Aha.
And it would be political malpractice for his entire speech now not to be about the post office.
And that would be okay.
That would be okay.
Yeah. Well, that would explain his presence a lot better. And
it may work out just fine.
All right. Yeah.
You may step back after all of this and say, Joe Biden is the luckiest politician in the world. Look how things are working out. It's not his talent. It's not his this. It's that. Well, whatever.
Yeah. Well, of course, if it's luck that does it, he'll take it. Win is a win. But
it's like an unenthusiastic vote, which is an enthusiastic vote against Trump. I'll take that. Also.
Yeah. I mean, you can bank it just the same. I will point out that, like we were saying right at the beginning of things, this has been in the works for quite some time. I mean, asked Jerry Connolly when he discovered that this weekend's news about the post office was a hot topic and ought to be covered. He's on the committee that's relevant to it, but he's been working on it for months. I don't know that he had anything to do with John Kasich, or whether John Kasich, when he volunteered himself for this, thought that he would be talking about the post office. But if it ends up that way, that part would be luck. But if it turns out that it was calculated the whole time,
sometimes you have to be lucky.
Really
just
amazing.
Take advantage of the luck that you send.
Okay.
So this is the Olivia Nuzzi big piece in New York Magazine. The most tremendous re-election campaign in American history ever, inside the chaotic, desperate, last-minute Trump 2020 reboot.
Is it a reboot? Okay.
Yeah. And it's all about how she went to Pennsylvania trying to figure out what's going on the ground, and how bad Brad Parscale was as a Death Star campaign chair, who is basically absent and spending most of his time at his Florida pool because what does he care? He's going to walk away with money. Right?
Okay.
But she went to Pennsylvania looking for the vaunted ground game, and it wasn't there.
Yeah.
She went to a recruiter who was recruiting volunteers, and there were only two people there, the recruiter and her. And the recruiter was tremendously disappointed to find out she was a reporter, and basically gave her the fisheye and said, I'm not allowed to talk to you.
So we didn't get much more scoop than that. But they were all at the boat parade. I don't know why you couldn't see that.
Yeah, which the the Republicans called the Spanish Armada, which is pretty funny because I guess they have no idea of how that turned out.
See the Death Star on that one.
Yeah, exactly right.
Wow. I mean, what else can they choose as a bad metaphor? All right, Spanish Armada. Were we on it? Which side were we on that whole Spanish Armada thing? We weren't around as a country, of course, but most of us, I think, being derived from English-speaking folks.
Well, also the underdog. So we were for the underdog.
Yeah, right. That's true. And, well, anyway, they burned up and sank is spoiler alert in case you haven't finished, your history course, or you're taking it online, perhaps, and you haven't gotten to that part yet. But I didn't mean to ruin your last Zoom meeting, but Spanish Armada loses.
Right.
Okay.
Anyway,
Amazing. Take a look
what
at
can
that.
we finish with here? Enthusiasm deficit remains, says the Washington Post. It's a hell of a way to parse the data, says my friend Karen Robinson, an expat watching from England. To parse the data showing you Biden is 12 points up. Newsflash, if all the swing voters are swinging to you, that candidate's going to have lower enthusiasm.
Oh.
Almost by definition.
What? Wait a second.
Well, if you only have your hardcore, they're going to be 100% in your favor. If you are also winning over swing voters or people who don't like either candidate, and they're all deciding to vote for you, you're not going to have 100% enthusiasm because the swing voters don't bring that. They bring their votes.
I mean, that's true. That's funny, and I wouldn't really... It's a little bit counterintuitive, but it's quite correct.
It's quite correct.
Yeah, the people who are just, okay, I will swing this way. They don't go, yeehaw, I can't wait to swing over there. They just say, okay. That's interesting.
Only the hardest of hardcore
Didn't
people are
strike me as
staying with
correct
Trump, so
at
their
first.
enthusiasm is going to be at a max. If Biden is even close to matching that, that's amazing because he's getting all the people who were like, I don't know, I hate politics, but I got to vote for somebody, so I'm voting for Biden.
That's pretty good. That's like quality spin. It makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll take it. And,
All right. Speaking of taking it, I'm going to take my leave, and I'll talk to you on Wednesday.
Okay, very good. We'll see you
Stay
then.
out of trouble. Unless it's good trouble.
Right, true. That part is allowed. Okay. Well, all right. Thanks, Greg. I appreciate it. We'll see you on Wednesday. I'm sure nothing major will happen between now and then, and we'll just have a nice chat.
Yeah.
Excellent. See you then. Thanks again. We'll be right back. Okay. So now I realize now that now that we can pretend to be from the convention floor, I'll have to use some sound effects to make up a speech.
Enthusiasm.
Yeah, I was going to try the, what the hell are we supposed to do, you moron?
That's perfect.
Maybe Wednesday.
You're laughing all day over that one.
All right.
All right.
Very good.
Abby says time to get up.
Okay. Hey, Abby. See you Wednesday. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see. Yes, so we are, I guess, technically at the beginning of the Democratic National Convention. I know we were talking about that. Greg was saying we might as well be saying that we're broadcasting from the convention itself, which nominally was to take place in Milwaukee. And I don't know what activity is going on there versus elsewhere. I'm curious about the logistics of it, and I haven't bothered to catch up on exactly how they're handling things. But I assume, I don't know, out of pure inertia, some part of it is probably taking place in Milwaukee, even if people are delivering speeches from all over the place. I don't know. So we'll see what we can do to follow along. There are bigger stories, of course. Usually the convention would be top billing, but well, for one thing, they're not happening, and for another thing, they're not happening because one of the other major news stories is dominating the news, still in the middle of a pandemic. There are about 30,000 different directions that we could take with all of this. Let's see. Well, I think we've gotten over we've said what we need to say about the story about Trump promoting a new, unproven, possibly poisonous drug. That doesn't seem like a good idea. Although I want to point out, yes, it is backed by the My Pillow guy, but another big booster is Ben Carson. And what he's doing promoting this, I have no idea. I mean, he's a doctor, nominally. Right now he's the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. So he's a little bit out of his lane on the portfolio he carries, but I guess as a doctor, you're somewhat in your lane to start talking about medications. I don't know what his neurosurgical background has to say about using oleander for what appears to be largely, anyway, at the onset, a respiratory illness, but whatever. Maybe we'll hear more about this thing. Maybe they'll abandon it sooner rather than later. I don't know. We'll see. There's, let's see. In terms of pandemic news, I want to kind of scroll around and see what I've got. There's a scary new article that I will let you read on your own. The human cost of the pandemic may dwarf its death toll. We usually think of the death toll as the human cost of something like a pandemic, but I guess this is just a good reminder of something. I wouldn't call it news, just a good reminder of the fact that it's hanging out there. It may not be that the greatest impact of the coronavirus pandemic is its death toll. The people who survive the disease may have long-term effects and even disabilities caused by it, depending on how hard they were hit, what their age is, what other pre-existing conditions they may have had. But you get the idea here. I'll give you the lead graph for some flavor of what's going on and see if we can interest you in reading it, let's say on your own, because there are many other things we want to catch up with. The official American death toll from the coronavirus pandemic now stands at 170,000. Checking in, by the way, on the Worldometers reveals that we are in the 173,000 range. Expect then 175,000 by, if not, I don't think we're going to get there today. Probably tomorrow, because we're just over the border of 173 here. 5.5 million infected, 173,000 dead from it. By the way, another good measure that I haven't been paying close attention to, but brought to my attention, the number of active cases versus total so far reported. We have 5.5 million total, I guess, positive diagnoses in the country based on the testing. 2.9 million have supposedly recovered from the disease. And I guess that's what this article goes to. Have you really recovered? And when will you know? But 2.4, almost 2.5 million active cases in this country, with nearly 64,000 plus serious and in critical condition at the moment. So, that's something to keep an eye on too, particularly as when I round up the news about total case counts or cases per million in population, deaths per million in population, and you find, say, for instance, the statistical anomaly microstate San Marino up near the top in both categories, but not having its numbers change very often. That's because the number of active cases there is extremely low. They got hit early and they're kind of done with it. And so I suppose maybe I need to add that to my statistical roundup, or at least to the thinking. Where are there the most active cases at the moment? Because the top 10 list is a little different. If you just jump over to Worldometers and look at the top 10 list, the default rating is in number of total cases, with, of course, the United States at the top with 5.5 million, Brazil with 3.3 million, India 2.6 million, Russia, South Africa, Peru, Mexico, Colombia, Chile, and Spain, rounding out the top 10. Now, if you switch to active cases, it is a little bit different. Some new countries making an appearance in the top 10, and some old countries that had been early hard hit making reappearances. USA still sits at the top, though, by the way, with 2.473 million active cases. Brazil second with just under 800,000. So, again, a large differential there. USA, Brazil, India, Russia, Colombia, Peru. Somewhat familiar, right? Bangladesh, which is in sometimes in the top 10 in terms of new cases, creeping up at the number 7 spot. Mexico, France, and South Africa. So it's a little bit different. And also, likewise, I guess I would say inside the United States, the total case numbers putting California at the top because of the size of its population. California, Florida, Texas, New York, Georgia, Illinois, Arizona, New Jersey, North Carolina, Louisiana. Louisiana, by the way, by other measures, if you're looking at deaths per million and new deaths in the last couple days, Louisiana is a terrible place to be sick with COVID-19. Their death rate is, for some reason, just anomalous. And has been for a long time. So we forget about that. Now, in terms of active cases, the picture changes a little bit. That puts Florida up at the top, and I think pretty squarely. Active cases, not quite double, but almost. 510,000 plus active cases right now. People sick today with COVID-19 in Florida. California, population, more than a third bigger. It's 21.4 million in Florida, 39.5 million in California. 510,000 active cases in Florida, 366,000 active cases in California. But as far as active cases go, third place, Arizona, which has dropped out of the news lately. They were on fire for some time and were racking up really top numbers in terms of new cases per capita, anyway, in their state a couple of weeks ago. Not completely gone, because all those people we heard about, even though their daily new case numbers are falling, those people have stayed sick. 161,000 plus active cases in Arizona, with a population of just 7.2 million, by the way. Then Texas, 28.9 million, much bigger, but actually lower in the number of active cases there. Surprise, fifth place, me, Virginia, 91,342. We've been lingering for some reason there. Maryland, New York, Alabama, South Carolina, and Missouri. A much more interesting mix of new and old. First, wave 1.0 and wave, let's say, 1.1, 1.2, occupying the space there. But this article gives you some reason why. The official American death toll from coronavirus pandemic now stands around 170,000. And while there are some encouraging indications that the growth of the disease is slowing and the fatality rate declining, both true in my experience, the U.S. death toll is likely to grow to 227,000 by just November 1st, according to Youyang Gu. I don't know who that is, but I'm sure we could find out, but you'll have to read the article to do it. To date, the most accurate modeler of COVID-19 in the country. So that's interesting enough. The global death toll is already 750,000, and while there are some intriguing hints that the disease may be dramatically less deadly in parts of the global south than it has proven in the global north, that total will nevertheless grow significantly in the months ahead as well. Unfortunately, those figures may also be significantly underestimating the ultimate public health trauma delivered by the pandemic, perhaps by several orders of magnitude. That is because the conventional death toll misses some major additional impacts of the pandemic, each larger and more distressing than the last. Taken together, they suggest that the full human cost of this pandemic may well be many times larger than even horrifying death counts imply. Now I feel like we might need the second paragraph to explain why that is. The first important revision of scale is perhaps somewhat familiar. The matter of excess deaths. This is the measure of how many more people are dying during the pandemic than would have been expected to in more normal times. The gap between officially recorded deaths and excess deaths varies from place to place, reflecting differences in both treatment and diagnostic capacity for COVID-19 and in the prevalence of other diseases and conditions on the community. In the U.S., a new estimate finds excess deaths have already surpassed 200,000, meaning that here in America, the death toll of the pandemic has been almost 20% higher than the official numbers. In England, the excess death toll is about 15% higher than the COVID-19 death count. In Peru, almost 200% higher. Yikes. The mix of causes of this excess mortality varies from country to country, too. While those figures from Peru most likely reflect many undiagnosed cases of COVID-19, in other parts of the world, the excess derives more from the secondary effects of the pandemic and lockdown. Sick people avoiding the hospital, those in need of elective surgery foregoing it. It's not that elective, I guess. Limited hospital and medical resources directed exclusively to the pandemic at the expense of other ongoing risks. In still other parts, the impact might be felt through missed preventative efforts. According to one estimate recently showcased in Nature, the global excess death toll just from TB, AIDS, and malaria, which typically kill 2.4 million annually, could almost double over the next year in a worst-case scenario in which the coronavirus pandemic interferes with the distribution of preventative tools like bed nets, the diagnosis of new cases, and the treatment of those who do fall sick. Even if nothing like the worst-case scenario comes to pass, the spillover lethality from COVID-19 would still be significant and would only appear sub-catastrophic because we have long normalized those already catastrophic millions of annual deaths. Now, believe it or not, we still haven't gotten to the second, more mind-bending revision, which comes from our emerging understanding of the long-term effects of COVID-19. Here we are. In the spring, our picture of the disease was dominated by hospitalizations, deaths, and recoveries. Most Americans following things closely probably understood the full course of illness to last about a month, start to finish. Over the last few months, however, we've heard more and more stories about coronavirus long haulers. Those still sick well after that 1-month cycle should have come to a close. Many of them still quite incapacitated by the illness. I don't think our collective understanding of the disease has properly incorporated these stories, in part because most of our accounts have been to this point anecdotal, with the result that the experiences of those suffering in these extended and often confusing ways appear to the rest of us like eerie outliers, tragic but unusual. But we are beginning to get more systematic research into the after effects of COVID-19, and though that research is early and limited, it suggests the possibility that these post-recovery complications may prove to be a more significant human health trauma to the country and the world than the pandemic death toll. The numbers from that emerging research are genuinely hair-raising. I'll give them to you and then we'll perhaps jump out for now. 87% of Italian patients, remember they were so early on in this pandemic, 87% of Italian patients who had recovered, quote unquote, from the disease after hospitalization reported at least one ongoing symptom of the disease. 78% of the recovered German patients were found 2 months later to have suffered structural changes to their hearts. 78%. The study focused largely on those with asymptomatic or mild cases, and in follow-ups, 76% exhibited a biomarker associated with cardiac injury following a heart attack. Another study of 1,200 patients hospitalized across 69 countries, nice, good number, found that 55% had long-term damage to their hearts. Subtracting those whose hearts may have had pre-existing damage, the study found 46% of previously healthy patients showed some amount of long-term scarring and dysfunction. Another study of COVID-19 patients found that roughly 90% of those with severe cases, 75% of those with moderate cases, and 60% of those with mild cases were still experiencing at least one symptom after 3 months, the most common symptom being breathlessness and fatigue, though the findings were less alarming than a few other studies, with only about 30% of severely sick patients showing abnormal chest x-rays and other acute issues at even lesser prevalence. Experts now believe that as many as 1 in 3 patients could suffer neurological or psychological after effects, according to Stat News. It's not only an acute problem, one critical care physician told Stat, this is going to be a chronic illness. Boy, I blew that very important last line, but a chronic illness. And like I said, much more to go in this article. This one I'll recommend to you to parse through on your own. Scare the crap out of yourself at home. Do it late at night. You won't be able to sleep. So take that advisement along with you. Okay, let's see. Other stories Should I scan to see if there's any other directly pandemic related stories or not? Well, okay. I think the answer is, oh yes, there was one very interesting and critical one that I think I may have mentioned to you on the way out the door on Friday, but we'll take a moment to take a look at this one. Atlanta Journal-Constitution reporting on this one, and I think there was, yes, a tweet that brought this one to my attention that I think will give us the key takeaway. Depending on how long the actual article is, we might not be able to get all the way through it. It might not be that important to get all the way through. Here's the tweet that brought it to my attention from Bill Gruskin. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Bill is a journalist and professor who took this actually grabbed a tweet from Ron Brownstein. Ron Brownstein, of course, also a journalist, and where is he working? Let's see. Senior editor of The Atlantic, senior political analyst for CNN, had tweeted this Atlanta Journal-Constitution story out with the comment, or a grab quote from it. President Trump's coronavirus task force warns that Georgia continues to see, quote, widespread and expanding community viral spread, and that the state's current policies aren't enough to curtail COVID-19. That much we sort of knew, but what does it really mean? And I thought Bill put an interesting spin on this, Bill Gruskin, saying, notably, this dire COVID warning wasn't publicly announced. People in Georgia know about this report, to the extent that they do, only because someone leaked it to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And that's pretty important. What ended up happening here, what I'm able to gather, the quick and dirty from this, if we don't read through the entire article, is that Georgia, run, of course, incompetently by Brian Kemp, Republican wannabe Trumpster, will give us the big test here of what happens when an immovably Trumpy object like Brian Kemp is met with the, irresistible Trump force. If the Trump White House is willing to instruct Georgia, you really have to do something about the uncontrolled spread of coronavirus in your state, and maybe even go to a statewide mask mandate and a partial, if not total, lockdown for your state. What does a Trumpy governor who's committed everything to opposing those very measures do with that? And, of course, the bigger story is, holy crap, even this White House recognizes that these are the things that need to be done for Georgia, and Georgia is going to continue to resist this. J. Scott Truby and Greg Bluestein writing this piece for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. New report calls for a mask mandate, closing some businesses, and other measures Brian Kemp has rejected. President Trump's coronavirus task force, of course, warns that Georgia continues to see widespread and expanding community viral spread, and that the state's current policies aren't enough to curtail it. The task force, quote, strongly recommends Georgia adopt a statewide mandate that citizens wear masks, joining a chorus of public health officials, Democrats, and others. That's interesting. A chorus of public health officials, Democrats, who listen to science, and others who have warned that Governor Brian Kemp's refusal to order face coverings has plunged the state into deeper crisis and will prolong recovery. Current mitigation efforts are not having a sufficient impact, the report said. Businesses such as nightclubs, bars, and gyms currently open with some restrictions in Georgia should be closed in the highest risk counties, the report said. The task force recommends restricting indoor dining at restaurants, now limited only by the number of diners who can be safely distanced 6 feet apart, to less than 1/4 of dining room capacity. Social gatherings, now capped at 50 people in Georgia, should be limited to 10 or fewer people, right back in April, where we once were, right? Georgia also needs to ramp up testing and contact tracing statewide, the report said, and testing and infection control measures need to be expanded in nursing homes and other long-term care facilities. In other words, Georgia has made zero progress from where we were in March and April. And basically exactly what everybody said was going to happen has happened. It didn't happen as quickly as people thought. At the time, of course, we all said, well, wait 2 weeks and see what happens. And maybe you have to wait 5 months. But when New York was under siege and New Jersey, along with them, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, when the Northeast was on fire with this stuff and we didn't know where this was going, and Georgia appeared to have none, or at least wasn't finding any because they weren't looking for any, vast swaths of the country. That's where the idea that it was a hoax originally came from. They're only sick up there in New York. This isn't a pandemic. Most of the country doesn't have this stuff. Plus, we hate New York, so who cares? And people said, just wait, you'll get it. Well, they did. And what was amazing was that they kept up the charade of believing that they didn't need masks or to close their restaurants. And now they're in terrible shape. And it's uncontrolled spread of the virus in Georgia, but it's run by a governor committed, fully committed to the position that it's still kind of a hoax and they really don't need to do anything about it. So, I don't know. If the president himself doesn't instruct Kemp to change directions, I don't know that the Coronavirus Task Force's report is going to be able to do it. All right. Well, anyway, you get the idea of this thing. You should probably read through it on your own as well. I guess this way we can get to a couple more stories. But, yeah, this is going to come crashing down around Brian Kemp as well. And it's a pretty amazing thing. I will be very curious to see how that battle comes out and whether Trump is willing to do something personally. Will he call Brian Kemp? He loves to do everything by telephone and tell him, you really got to do this. And would Brian Kemp do it just based on that? Or would Brian Kemp say, you got to come out in public and say this? I'll join you for an event where you announce the 180-degree reversal being necessary for Georgia, and then I'll do it, which, in some case, in a normal situation would mean, yeah, sure, all right, we'll do that. But Trump may say, to hell with that, I'm not sharing a stage with you, and I'm not going to be the one to announce the reversal. You have to. It's your state. You're the one that has to do it. You should take it on the chin, not me. I'm going to hide here in the White House and pretend nothing has changed. And most presidents, I don't know, some presidents, I guess, would claim that right and push the governor out front instead. I think it's very likely that Trump would do this himself. All right, let's see. Other things to catch up on. We haven't read a great deal of the reports about what was going on at the post office. We simply incorporated all of these facts by reference and said this is going to become a huge story, and it did. But lots of collections, as I said, of stories from around the country about mailboxes being removed, lots of photos circulating on Twitter of trucks, pickup trucks and flatbed trucks filled, not pickup trucks, too small, you can only fit a couple of mailboxes in there, but flatbed trucks, etc., removing dozens of mailboxes. Over the weekend, I guess, Mark Meadows was on TV answering for all of this, and I think he said that they were going to stop this collection of mailboxes from around the country. And what that usually means is we are not going to stop the collection of mailboxes from around the country. But sometimes it's just a dodge. I think after he committed the White House to the position that they would stop the Postal Service from collecting and removing mailboxes, people began circulating photos of their mailboxes still in place but locked closed. So that's, of course, not much more helpful than a missing mailbox. So that might be Mark Meadows' idea of keeping his word. Well, we didn't remove those mailboxes. That's what we said that we would do for you. We didn't say anything about making sure that they were still functional. So that happening, and around the country also, we should take note, the automatic sorting machines that basically the modern post office uses to handle their volume of mail being removed and dismantled from post offices and distribution centers around the country. I imagine that the excuse is that what they're saying is they want to, as part of their post office reforms, centralize, or I guess implement more or greater centralization in mail sorting, and they might, if they're not lying, be interested in building sort of mega sorting facilities where all the sorting is done, and then local post offices get sort of pre-sorted mail so that they can concentrate on the delivery, the last mile portion of all of this, what makes the post office, the postal service, the postal service. But are those machines turning up anywhere and being reassembled in any of the larger postal facilities around the country? No. Where are they going? People don't know. There's mail missing. There's sorting machines missing. There are reportedly postal service trucks driving in huge loops around cities, around and around, with instructions never to just eventually deliver their goods to the postal sorting centers or the local post offices. We're going to have to get to the bottom of it, and I guess that'll be the focus of the hearing upcoming on, let's say they moved it up to August, when? All right, next week, I think, 24th or so. Well, we'll check in on how those are expected to go, and that and other stories right after this. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. And send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So we left off on the post office story, just with a brief recap of what people were reporting from around the country, and there are lots of compilations of those stories. I guess I'll spend a moment on recapping sort of how the weekend went in terms of people, one, complaining that the Democrats weren't doing anything, that we did at the top of the show, and two, the fact that they are coming back. I have Laura Clausen's coverage of that news on the front page of Daily Kos open here. And we'll read through her quick summary of what's up. With outrage over postal delays growing, Speaker Nancy Pelosi is calling the House of Representatives back from August recess to vote on legislation blocking Donald Trump and his lackeys. But of course, this would have to go to the Senate. You know what happens there. From continuing their sabotage of the U.S. Postal Service. Trump's aim, which he has directly admitted, is to make it impossible for the Postal Service to effectively process ballots for voting by mail. But the effort to prevent that is affecting other mail as well. In 2019, 1.2 billion prescriptions were delivered through the Postal Service, including almost 100% of those sent through the VA to veterans. Pelosi pointed out in a letter to House Democrats, lives, livelihoods, and the life of our American democracy are under threat from the president. What are you getting by mail these days? I'm getting masks delivered by mail, I think. I'd like to be able to think that those things will arrive sometime soon. The bill the House will vote on prohibits the Postal Service from changing levels of service or operations from their January 2020 level before January 2021 or the end of the pandemic. Pelosi also called on House Democrats to hold events at post offices in their districts. And guess what? They did it. And it made news. It had a visual. And the local news stations were hungry for that, and they aired it, and it became a big story over the weekend. It was a good plan. Of course, once the House passes such a bill, it goes to the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's legislative graveyard unless public pressure on this issue is so overwhelming that even McConnell can't ignore it. I don't know if we've gotten there yet. McConnell can ignore an awful lot. But as we've seen, too much pressure for McConnell to ignore is an extremely high bar to clear, even despite the concerns of a few vulnerable Republican senators in heavily mail-dependent states. In addition to the planned House legislation, a number of Democratic attorneys general are considering legal action, with Washington State expected to file a lawsuit this week. Anyone filing such a lawsuit will have cause to thank Trump for being so very clear, not once but twice, about his motives in refusing to include Postal Service funding in a coronavirus stimulus package. And, of course, you know how he laid it out. Now, they need that money in order to have the post office work, so it can take all of these millions and millions of ballots, he said. And if they don't get those two items, that means you can't have universal mail-in voting. That's his plan. Democrats have a limited time to get in his way, so it's good to see them moving with urgency and with public attention so focused on the mail delays that Trump's Postmaster General, Louis DeJoy, has already created. You may have seen, as I did via Twitter over the weekend, people, our internet sleuths, having identified where DeJoy lives in his when he's in D.C., of course, the condo building that he lives in, and where he lives when he's back at home in North Carolina. And protests sprung up outside of both homes over the weekend. So, you know, good grassroots action on that one, too. Let's see. As a matter of fact, why not continue on with the Postal Service theme? Mark Sumner has another piece on this one as well. Let's open it up and mark it so I include it for you. The Postal Service scandal doesn't belong only to Donald Trump. Mitch McConnell played a big role. He did, and by the way, a lot of time and energy spent over the weekend finding other people who share in it. And, you know, so the hobby of a certain sector of Twitter is to find ways to blame those things on Barack Obama, if you are a Bernie Sanders type supporter, or on Bernie Sanders if you are a Barack Obama type of supporter. And there's a kernel of truth in all of it, because, you know, this is a very large operation, and people who were national legislators and executives will have had a hand in all of this. It's true. But for the moment, we'll start with this one, on which I think we can all agree. Mitch McConnell is a big jerk, and he effed things up pretty royally as well. Once upon a time, Mark says, most Americans would have been hard-pressed to name the Postmaster General. That's true. That fabled time was any time before May of this year, when Donald Trump replaced Postmaster General Megan Brennan with Louis DeJoy. And yes, I had to look up Megan Brennan. What position of power did Brennan occupy before taking over the Postal Service under Barack Obama? None. Brennan started as a mail carrier at the Postal Service in 1986, delivering letters to neighborhoods in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. She worked her way through the ranks at USPS. For more than a decade, she headed up distribution and transportation in the Northeast before taking over as postmaster in her 27th year with the Postal Service. That's a pretty good job there. Well done. But again, normally the kind of job that you didn't need a political operator in, because it wasn't a political position. It was just about delivering the mail the best you could. Who knows how to do that? People who have delivered mail. Although I guess some people might disagree. These guys don't know anything about delivering mail. We need a businessman in the Postmaster General spot, which is what I guess Donald Trump thought. Compare that to Louis DeJoy. His postal-related career was almost as long as Brennan's. It's just that DeJoy spent that career practicing what he's doing now, tearing the post office down. And DeJoy doesn't just owe his new role to Donald Trump. He's hugely in debt to Mitch McConnell as well. Before stepping into the top job in May, DeJoy had a total of 0 time with the actual U.S. Postal Service. However, he did have 2 decades of experience as CEO of a freight company that competed against the Postal Service, making it no surprise that his stock portfolio is full of reasons to destroy the institution where he now works. Much more importantly, in terms of landing his current position, DeJoy has been a big supporter and big fundraiser for the Republican Party in general, and for Donald Trump in particular. In fact, DeJoy was named one of 4 finance chairs for the Republican Party, along with such luminaries as Steve Wynn and Michael Cohen, who is also back in the news, by the way. And DeJoy's contact with Republican leadership didn't end with cutting checks for their campaigns. According to the Washington Post, shortly before Donald Trump met with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer at the White House, he was visited by Louis DeJoy. At the meeting with Democratic leaders, Trump made it clear he wasn't providing any funding for the Postal Service. In two later interviews, Trump made it absolutely clear he was depriving the post office of funds specifically to hinder its ability to deal with mail-in ballots. And shortly after meeting with Trump, DeJoy removed the officials in charge of the day-to-day operations, reassigning 23 top executives and clearing the ranks for more Trump loyalists. But Trump isn't the only Republican who's been visiting with DeJoy, and DeJoy isn't the only Postal Service leader who can thank Republicans for his sudden rise. As Yahoo News reports, DeJoy is in frequent contact with top Republican Party officials. Presumably that means Mitch McConnell, which is quite the coincidence, seeing that every single member of the current all-white, all-male Postal Service Board of Governors can thank McConnell for that role. As it turns out, since 1970, members of the Board of Governors have served in staggered 9-year terms. The idea is to have a board whose membership is spread across multiple administrations and which owes allegiance to no particular White House. That should mean that about half of those currently seated on the board are left over from Obama's term of office, with others appointed by Trump. But that's not what happened. In 2015, Obama renominated most of the existing board members for a second term, including those members appointed under Bush. Those 6 members should still all be on the board, but none of them are. And that's because McConnell did what he did so often, blocked those nominations. By the time Trump stepped in, the number of remaining Bush and Obama-appointed board members was exactly 0. Then, as with federal judges, McConnell abruptly got out of the way. That means every single current member of the United States Postal Service Board of Governors was appointed by Donald Trump. That board then officially ousted lifelong Postal Service employee Megan Brennan and replaced her with Republican fundraiser Louis DeJoy. Those thinking that McConnell might rise up to fight against Trump aren't just backing the wrong turtle, they're backing the guy who co-owns this mess. So there you have it. By the way, he includes a screenshot of the current board of governors. I don't know, all white guys. Any names that ring a bell? I don't think so. But you can take a look. Robert Duncan, John Barger, Ron Bloom, Roman Martinez IV, Donald Moak, M-O-A-K, and William Zollars, dollars with a Z, I guess. And his middle initial is D, by the way, in case you just want to switch to William Z. Dollars. No, it's William D. Zollars instead. So that's a pretty interesting little tidbit. The whole thing was designed to stagger the terms such that no one particular White House would command the loyalty of a majority of the board, or certainly not the entirety of the board. But it has magically turned out that that's the case after all. Goodness me. Well, anyway, let's see. We also spent some time, as I said, talking about the fact that, yes, Democrats were in fact working on this and have been working on it for quite some time and succeeded in making it a huge story despite everyone's complaints that they weren't doing anything over the weekend. Now, onto the question of why the request, the invitation to Louis DeJoy to testify in the upcoming hearing as opposed to a subpoena. People did ask that question. Not exactly my area of expertise, but I do think it's pretty clear that if you find yourself, as I guess we will eventually with almost all these things, unless we go the preferred route of simply taking things into our own hands in the House of Representatives, you will find yourself inviting Louis DeJoy to show up, and he perhaps declines to show up, although he may very well show up at this point. I mean, it might be the better play is to show up and simply say, yeah, we're doing this, and it's our prerogative to do so, and you can kiss my ass, basically, and see what the House of Representatives does with that. But if he were to refuse to show up, of course, everybody knows that then they would be entitled to subpoena him, and that this, according to current case law anyway, would entitle them to force him to show up, except it doesn't actually force him to show up unless you get a court order saying that we're going to have federal marshals arrest him and escort him to testify before the House, at which point he could just obstruct everything anyway. But what's come up, of course, first there's the question of, well, why didn't they just go straight to the subpoena? And the answer is, if you find yourself litigating the subpoena, whether the subpoena was properly issued or whether there's a real basis for seeking to use the judiciary to enforce this subpoena, you can have that litigation. And in the run-up to it, the judges will say, all right, well, how reasonable was this subpoena? Not only the topics that you seek to have DeJoy testify to, but how reasonable is it to have handed him just a straight-up subpoena? Did you ask him if he would come and he refused? Because if that's the case, then I can see why you would then go with the subpoena. But if you didn't even ask, it's not necessarily the case that I won't allow you to enforce your subpoena, because you could do that. But, the normal practice is to say, well, why don't you come in and testify? And only then, if they are reluctant or refuse to do so, do you go to the level of a subpoena. That's an escalation. So sometimes courts, when they're trying to balance these things out, if you start out on the wrong foot and the court says, I really don't like the way you went straight to the subpoena, you're allowed to do that, but it's going to color the way I consider the rest of the reasonableness of what you're asking for here. That could become a problem. Of course, if the other interest was, well, why not go immediately to inherent contempt and arrest him and drag him before the House committee? And of course, the answer is you can't be in contempt of Congress unless there's a reason to believe that you were legally obligated to show up. So, I guess that you could say that argues in favor of going straight to the subpoena. But like we said, these guys have a preference for doing things by the book. We don't want there to be even the talking point for the Republicans. I mean, maybe it's okay. You should sacrifice this talking point to them. It's okay at this point. And you could probably spin around it and say, we're tired of playing nice with the Republicans. They know that he was supposed to testify. And they know that we're absolutely insisting that he show up. We skipped cut out the red tape and we went straight to the subpoena. It's defensible to do that. That they aren't is, interesting. And maybe, it may also play into their strategy. They might be perfectly happy doing one of those empty chair hearings where all the members come and tell the horror stories of what's going on at the post offices in their district, and that's all televised and it gets on the news, and the Republicans just look worse and they don't end up showing up to tell their side of the story. Maybe they think there's some advantage to that. But the question of why don't you just go immediately to inherent contempt? Well, there has to be something to be in contempt of first, and that would be the subpoena. And even there, if you went immediately to inherent contempt, you would find yourself almost immediately in litigation. A habeas corpus petition would likely be filed by DeJoy's lawyers saying, you can't just arrest him for this. Let's hash this whole thing out, figure out what it is that you need. Since you skipped the initial step of inviting us and went straight to arresting him or straight to subpoenaing him and then immediately declaring him in contempt, you haven't made, the judges would want to know, for instance, what sort of accommodations were made for seeking compromise. Ordinarily, we work these things out. When we have issued subpoenas for people and they have refused, and we have pursued statutory contempt of Congress, it hasn't been super effective, although they've upheld the congressional right to both issue subpoenas and hold people in contempt of Congress and see that they be prosecuted for it if necessary. But it's a very long and drawn-out process. It'll certainly last until past the election. But part of the litigation will be, again, how reasonably did you approach this thing? Did you give us a chance? And that also bears on the question of why not immediately hold it? Why not hold those hearings today and say your subpoena is for today? And again, that'll be part of the litigation. It wasn't reasonable. Your Honor. They just turned around and said, I'm supposed to show up the next day. This is a very important hearing. I need to prepare for it. I need time to schedule other things, alternative. I'm going to be taken out of action at a critical point for the post office, he would argue. And in order to do that, takes some arranging. I can't just simply turn around on a dime and show up on the moment that they demand it. And most judges will say, yeah, sure. We'll at least assume that has some validity. And then when they ask you under subpoena to show up, why didn't you? I'll have some answers for that as well. All right, well, why didn't you pursue statutory contempt? That's the preferred method these days for Congress prosecuting contempt of Congress. Inherent contempt hasn't been used for almost a century. Why not go that route? And you'll have to answer for that, and the judges will have to decide whether they think that's reasonable. And all in all, of course, you're looking at courts that will probably look askance at this and say, the American people aren't ready for the Democratic House of Representatives to start arresting Republican administration officials and imprisoning them. It's going to be a bit of a shock to the system. You should pursue the litigation of your subpoena in court instead, and ask for the U.S. attorneys to enforce contempt of Congress for you, which of course they won't because they're part of the Bill Barr DOJ, and they'll be instructed by Donald Trump not to do this sort of thing. And you can make that argument to the court too, and they'll say, oh yeah, prove it, and that takes about 2 years to do. So, I mean, that's the reason for I guess you could call it the go slow approach, as opposed to immediately arresting DeJoy and throwing him off a cliff somehow. But, that's, I guess, the whole thing where we're all interested in rule of law, etc., and restoring rule of law. This is kind of the way it goes. The rule of law is very slow. Just kind of true. So anyway, I hope that the explanation made some sense to you, even if it is frustrating to watch. By the way, also interesting fact, over the weekend, I happened to recall and put out there, and it's become rather a big viral tweet for me. The last time I mentioned that it's been almost a century since the Congress used its inherent contempt powers, it was back during the back half of the Teapot Dome scandal from the Herbert Hoover administration that we're talking about. So it was back around 1930s was the very last time that they happened to use this. It's just sort of interesting, and people have said ironic, but I don't think that ironic is really the right term for it. But the last time the Congress used it was the Senate moving to use its inherent contempt power to enforce a subpoena in an investigation into the corrupt dealings of a Republican-appointed U.S. Postmaster General. It was the airmail scandal of 1930, I believe. It was what they called it way back then. They didn't have gates back then, not yet. It's a more modern invention. But the airmail scandal, essentially Herbert Hoover's Postmaster General and his someone who was assisting him in this effort, who was the one who was actually arrested under this. It was William Mccracken was the name of the guy who actually got arrested eventually under the inherent contempt power. He was an assistant secretary of commerce, I think, and at that point, assistant secretary of commerce for like aeronautics or something like that. Anyway, he helped the Postmaster General sort out the contracts for the then fledgling United States airmail service, in which domestic carriers would get contracts to move the mail across the country. And of course, being Herbert Hoover Republicans, they did so in corrupt fashion and awarded the contracts to their friends and cronies and supporters and donors and such. And that came under investigation, and they really didn't want to be caught, so they didn't show up when they were subpoenaed. And so Mccracken was subpoenaed, wouldn't show, and they dispatched the sergeant-at-arms to go get him. He went into hiding. They had to search all over for him. And eventually, though, I don't know what he was hiding from, because when they eventually they litigated it for a while, and they managed to establish the fact that, yes, the sergeant-at-arms of the Senate can arrest you. They did effect the arrest, and then, of course, I mean, they already knew this, but the next step revealed to everyone that there was nowhere to imprison him. Despite the fact that we all have heard the rumors, there is no jail cell in the Capitol complex, although the Capitol Police do have facilities where they can lock you up. They could bring you there. That's what I guess is assumed might happen to someone who was arrested under inherent contempt proceeding. But it was a lot easier back then. Apparently, when he was imprisoned and only was locked up after a lengthy court case that actually was only finally decided by the Supreme Court of the United States in 1935, he was locked up for his 10 days or whatever that he had to live in the Willard Hotel. So, that's some cushy digs for a prison term. So I don't know what he was waiting for. But, now these days, of course, we're all in lockdown from the pandemic. We'd be perfectly happy being locked up in, is the Willard Hotel still there? I guess so. I don't know. You can go look it up. But a nice hotel would be a great place to serve a prison term, I would think, under those conditions. Anyway, so yes, also for those of you wondering, he didn't die in prison. He was eventually released. And yes, that means you can say, release the Mccracken, and we can all get that tension over with. It did happen. But there was a Supreme Court case. By the way, the Senate investigation was launched by then Senator and at that time future Supreme Court Justice Hugo Black. It's kind of interesting that Hugo Black launched this investigation, I guess issued the subpoena, asserted the right, I assume he was behind asserting the right to arrest Mccracken under inherent contempt. So in case you were wondering, like, for instance, is that really valid? Is it still valid? Well, the last time it was tested, the Supreme Court said it was fine. By the way, it was an 8-0 decision of the court. It was Journey versus Mccracken, Jurney. That's the name of the Senate Sergeant at Arms. So Journey versus Mccracken, 1935 case, 8-0 decision that, you do have this power and you can go ahead and arrest the guy. One of the justices, for what reason, I'm not sure. I guess he might have had some connection to the parties in the case, abstained from any of the proceedings. So 8-0 decision, and that handed down in 1935. By 1937, I think, Hugo Black is on the Supreme Court. So at that point, I don't know whether he replaced the guy that sat it out, but you'd still have, a unanimous decision, presumably. One of the guys joining the court was obviously of the opinion that this was a power of Congress. Hasn't been touched for some time, but it is interesting to note that the last time it was used against a witness in an investigation of a postmaster general. So pretty direct precedent, I would think. So we'll have to wait and see how that one goes. It would be a lot of fun. I understand that Congressman Ted Lieu has some legislation pending on I think he said it was about the reaffirming the inherent contempt power and maybe setting procedure for how it might be used in the modern context. So probably something that they would like to line up and get done. It also occurred to me over the weekend, of course, that it was a big topic for me way back when. From 2005 to 2010, I wrote about the necessity for impeaching a lawless president. So check mark there. We didn't get it done with George W. Bush, but we did get it done with Donald Trump. Didn't work out the way we all hoped, although I think we all knew how it might work out. But again, at least the necessity of doing so, even if you can't remove him. But it was considered a long shot, and, we paved the road, and that's got done. So check mark for that one. The other, of course, how to change Senate rules with a simple majority vote such that the filibuster rules might be changed and reformed. And check mark there. We happen to have gotten that one done as well. Another big topic from 2005 to 2010, the necessity of re-examining and resurrecting the inherent contempt power, given that a corrupt Republican presidency or a corrupt presidency of any party, I suppose, would have no difficulty suppressing the ability of U.S. attorneys to prosecute contempt of Congress under the statutory regime. In other words, Congress needed to be able to reassert its ability to hold people in contempt and punish them for it, independent of the executive branch. Otherwise, they'd never be able to hold corrupt executive branch to account in their as part of their oversight powers. So we have yet to implement that one, but it would be interesting to see if we can't check that one off the list. And then I guess I'll have to go back and see what else I wrote about between 2005 and 2010 and what else might be coming, and we can all buy stock based on that and become millionaires. Okay, we'll wrap it up for today and hand things over to Justice Putnam, who has the monumental task of touching on everything else that we didn't touch on today. Speaking of things we didn't touch on, Michael Cohen, I said, was back in the news. His book is out, and it's full of lurid details, including some that might actually prove that the P-tape was real all along. And how crazy is this? It didn't even make noise over the weekend. Why couldn't we spend time talking about that? Too many other crazy, stupid things that Donald Trump is currently doing to talk about the stupid and crazy things he used to be doing. But, as I mentioned, time now for Justice Putnam to take over. Here's what he's got on tap for us today. Let's see. Mark Meadows was about to cry defending Trump's false claims on mail-in voter fraud. I wish he had gotten all the way around to it. After deadly spikes across his state, Georgia Governor Brian Kemp will finally allow local mask mandates. I guess that's, we know the
From
outcome.
Daily Kos
Amazing.
Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show.
With David Waldman.
But I neglected to mention that Kemp is only allowing those mask mandates with some conditions. We'll find out more about that when Justice takes over. And Trump's younger brother Robert died on a day when Donald only had to use 3 mulligans for the whole 18 holes on his course. He was in grief and mourning. Of course, we all watched that. That and more coming next.